everyone. We are back for episode 3 for post-secondary transition. My name is Patrick Cadigan. I am one of the hosts. I'm a teacher in the Howard County Public School System in Maryland. And who is my co-host?
I'm Megan Smallwood, and I'm one of the transition specialists in Howard County Public School Systems.
So, Megan has put together a handy-dandy website called www.postsecondarytransition.com. That website is for families. So, this podcast is essentially intended to be an offshoot of that, right? So, as we go along, we'll hit more specific topics. Eventually, we're hoping to introduce families and to interview them and find out what the transition experience is like for them. And hopefully they'll be able to pass on nuggets of information that can help out other families. Ideally, we'll be able to talk to some service providers, maybe some other teachers. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be the goal.
That would be nice if they'd actually want to talk to us. So we'll see how it goes. Now, the format for this podcast, as we've discussed, we're thinking probably about 15 minutes, and we're going to try to post episodes every 2 weeks. We're definitely not going to go on for more than 30 minutes, but needless to say, when you're talking about post-secondary transition, there's a lot of information out there.
Right. And I think the website has so many resources there, but we know how overwhelming that can be. And when you're not, working and living in it every day as we are with all the acronyms and everything, it might help to have somebody to talk a little bit about it and explain it and answer any of those burning specific questions you might have. So that's why we're here.
And along those lines, so why don't we start off as we always start off, Megan? What does post-secondary transition mean?
So as I've said, there's a lot of transitions, right? As you're moving through the school years with your child. And the post-secondary transition is preparing for the future. Typically age 14, the conversation begins till 21. And focusing on what your goal is for after 21, after school ends. What are they going to do? And how are you going to get them to that point, along with the other milestones you might be hitting before 21, like at 18 when they are seen as a legal adult. And you have to consider other things that need to be put in place, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But just preparing for the future while you have those resources at your disposal from the school system and people that know your child and can be there to answer those questions for you.
Megan, one of the questions that I have always been thinking about, okay, so you are a high school transition coordinator.
Right.
I'm a middle school teacher. So where does transition start for high school? Explain that process.
That's a tricky one because you're right. It technically begins in middle school. I mean, a lot of them are turning 14 in that 8th grade year. So I know we've had a lot of conversations, and I know our transition team leader has, met with the middle school teams and discussed, okay, transition pages are coming on the IEP. Here's what you need to do at this age. But again, that middle school group, teachers wise, they're not living it day in and day out like we are. So they're just trying to get through it. And to be honest, a lot of the parents, I think, in that 8th grade year are not thinking about, oh, when my child turns 21, because, the exit year at the bottom says it's 8 years away, 7 years away. They were thinking about high school and that transition. So I feel like it's an area that gets overlooked a lot, in those middle school years. And then, when they come up to high school, I know a lot of times as a freshman or that 9th grade year, parents still aren't ready to talk about it with me. I mean, there are a lot that know, okay, it's coming, I need to plan, but there's many that have other priorities first. And that's understandable. It's, a huge transition coming from middle to high school. But my job, I think, is to try and get them to at least hear what the timeline's going to look at and why it's important to consider it sooner than later, and just get the conversation started.
Well, I'll tell you from the middle school teacher's perspective, where we start out with kind of like what you were saying. So the student turns 14, and that's when the discussion from the middle school perspective starts, right? So we start with the career preference and interest interview.
Inventory, yeah.
Yeah, and that basically is just sitting down with the student, which I always love to do because it facilitates a discussion.
Right.
And I get to learn a little bit more about the student and what they're interested in. So that's something that I've always been interested in. But we start with the interests, and then we go like in areas of interest, right? Like, are you interested in arts and entertainment, sports, business, education, like whole list? And really start to kind of have that discussion about, well, where exactly do you see yourself?
Right.
So, and I know that it can be a challenge in the sense that in middle school, I mean, are the kids really thinking about, what am I doing, 10, 15 years from now? Right. And then,
but it's great to get that conversation started with them so that when they come up to high school, it's not completely taking them by surprise. A lot of times when I get those IEPs, and I really appreciate the information that's put on there by the middle school teacher who knew the student well and has written down, so-and-so is interested in culinary arts. It's a great conversation starter for me because I can go back and say, oh, well, Mr. Cadigan met with you last year. You remember doing that and talking about what you might want to do for a career? You mentioned culinary arts. And a lot of times kind of jogs their memory. Oh, yeah, we did talk about that, but here's something else I've discovered I'm interested in. And yeah, like you mentioned, I'll do a transition interview with them each year and give them different interest inventories. And it's always, and I tell the student this by senior year, it's always fun to see the development from freshman to senior years, because sometimes you have those students who come in knowing exactly what they want. They're very driven. They're going to take these classes at the ARL, the Applied Research Lab, where they have the career cluster academies. And, that's great. But then there's others who every year it's like, I think this year I want to do this. And then the following year, like, nope, I don't want to do that. I want to focus on this area. And I'll go back and I'll show them, when we met as a freshman, this is what you said you were interested in. And now look what you said. Like, it's just that process of learning themselves over the years and discovering what they really like, just, based off of experiences and interests, and here's where they're at.
One of the other things that we, as far as the interest preference is concerned, because of course we know that, we've worked with families where we have nonverbal students, right? And so there is an interest inventory that can be done that focuses around visual representations of jobs.
Yes.
And that is another good place to start. And I've had to, with my background in working with students in what is called the ALS track, or the academic life skills track. These are students who will not receive a high school diploma, but they will receive a certificate. And in some cases, those visual inventories are also very helpful, because if the student cannot articulate, well, this is something that I'm interested in, visually they can respond to it. And so that's another tool that we have in our belt.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. The students I was referring to before were the diploma track, but certificate track, I mean, they also do the transition interview every year, and it's very different. And I've had parents ask, well, my student's nonverbal, or my student has limited mobility. How can you determine, what their interests are? And I'll tell them, yeah, we do the pictorial interest inventory. I've created a couple different versions so that, they have different careers presented to them. But a lot of times too, with our group who may be receiving the certificate track, the firsthand experience of allowing them the opportunity to practice these career skills or job exploration in some of our work programs or in building experiences really is telling of what they like and don't like. And a lot of times I'll refer to that as part of the transition interview, because I see, the student loves shredding. That's a job that he prefers and can do fairly independently. He hates cleaning, so we're not going to try and help him find a position in the community doing that. So I think sharing that with parents has helped too, because it makes them realize at home we could be piggybacking on these experiences and, seeing ourselves what they like and don't like with jobs at home.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for families when it comes to transitions?
Oh, there's a lot. I always try to, I experienced the transition with my sister, and I saw firsthand, as I've mentioned in the first podcast, my mom, fighting for and advocating for some things. And to this day, she's 42 now. There's still things that they work through. And it can be, I think the hardest thing is having to work with agencies that may be state or, government funded, who don't have the empathy or just work like the school system does. So having to work with these different organizations who are not user-friendly, quick to respond, just getting them the answers that they need or making it easy for them is one of the most difficult things to witness and to help families with. I mean, I'll be honest, DDA or Developmental Disabilities Administration can be tricky with communication at times. Getting SSI, one of those milestones that we'll talk about at 18, it can be a tricky process.
And when you say SSI, what is that?
Social Security. So when the young adult turns 18, they're entitled to Social Security benefits monthly, because they're seen as an adult, and they're just looked at their assets as opposed to the families. So you work with SSA, Social Security Administration, which, you have the general phone number to contact, you make an appointment, but there's no person other than that, if you have questions or issues along the way, that really will help you through it. So I know there's been a lot of difficulties with families through that, and it's frustrating. And I think those experiences prior to turning 21 kind of put that thought in their head. Well, what's it going to be like after they leave the school system? This is my future, So if I can help them through that and help make it as easy as possible, that's part of my goal.
Where do you encourage families to start? And again, this is from the perspective of high school. Like, what's like that beginning step? What's that beginning phase?
I think just at age 14, in middle school, especially, just starting a file. If the only thing you do is to get a binder, label it, transition for Johnny, and then you have a place where all this paperwork that's going to come through, or the IEP, the last IEP, you have the most copy of the recent IEP, the most recent copies of assessments. I think just having that file at home is a great start, because you're going to have things to add every year. I'm going to be sending my parents stuff. I know it can be overwhelming and get lost in the mix. So just putting it all in one place. And then I know it's funny to say, when you have some free time, but, when you do have a minute, just to go through and kind of look through it and organize it, the best you can, or just to refresh your memory on what some of these terms are. I think that's the best thing you can do.
One of the other resources that you had put out there is going to www.postsecondarytransition.com, and at the top of the webpage, going to the Start Here. Mm-hmm. And those pages are designed and intended for families, specifically in high school, where when you click on that link, it's asking you the question, well, where are you? Like, I have a freshman, I have a sophomore, I have a junior. So, and there's a whole list of things in there that can be a good jumping off point for families. So
Yeah.
hopefully that'll be a resource that can be used.
And I think, I know we talk a lot about certificate students, but those on the diploma track, the biggest thing I think for those students, especially in middle school, is to start recognizing that they do have an IEP, because it always surprises me when I come across students by junior, senior year even, who are like, what do you mean? What's an IEP? And, I have to go back and explain, well, those things that you get from the teachers, copies of notes, extra time, that's listed on your IEP. And it's a tough conversation at that age to have, because you're preparing them for, could it be college, trade school, whatever may be coming up. And you want them to be as prepared as possible and recognize that they've had some supports, and that's okay. It's really helped them along the way. So I think, starting in middle school and going through that and practicing also that self-advocacy piece of making sure they are getting their accommodations, recognizing that the teacher may be already giving them the copies of notes, but not every teacher may just hand it to them. They might have to ask for it, and that kind of aligns with after high school. If they go to college, they're going to have to go up to the professor and advocate for those accommodations and support. So.
And one of the things, and I know that it might seem like a foregone conclusion or, fairly obvious. However, who do families go to for help for transition? What does that look like?
So within the school system, at least in Howard County, every high school has, and every special center has a transition specialist assigned to the school. Outside of Howard County, it's designed differently. There might be one for a group of high schools, but they're the resource, to help with any of the transition questions you may have. If you're not sure who they are, you can always reach out to the case manager or the team leader at your school, who can put you in contact with them. But you should hear from them at the beginning of the year with an introduction letter, and usually a parent questionnaire goes home just to get some input. And it'll ask you if you want to have a one-on-one meeting with your transition specialist. I love those meetings because it really gives us the chance to talk more individually about, their concerns or questions. But, I'm always here, and I always make sure to send a note to the parent after an IEP meeting. I'm happy to meet individually if you'd like. And Google Meets have been very helpful with that, with everyone's schedule, just being able to do it virtually, or a phone call, whatever may work for the parent. So.
Brilliant. All right. Yeah. Guess what?
Are we done with 3?
I think we're done with episode 3.
Look at that. Flying through.
So, we still have a lot to talk about.
Oh, I have a lot to talk about. Yeah.
So we'll keep going, and we'll keep building those in. But please, if you like the podcast, send us a note. We're hungry for feedback. Let us know what you think, the topics that you want discussed. And again, we're hoping to have families come on and, we'll interview them and talk about the experiences that they've had. Also, another way to help, please tell families about us, and help spread the word. And we'll see if we can get out there and start talking to some more people and some more topics.
Yeah, we'd love to talk about any topic that you may have questions about, or just want to hear us suggest things or talk it through with you. We're here to help, so don't be afraid to reach out.
Brilliant. All right, we're all done. We'll talk to you guys later.
See ya.